This week in news surrounding Israel, Israel has sent strong warnings to Hezbollah amid threats to gas field. That's the headline. Stay tuned for all the details, friends. Well, shalom, everyone. Welcome once again to this week's newscast. I'm Robert Gottslick, your host. And last week, on July 27th, the Times of Israel reported that Israel has sent strong warnings to Hezbollah through diplomatic and military channels amid repeated threats from the terror group's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. The messages passed along through the U.S. and France warned the terror group that any action taken against the offshore Karish gas field would provoke a strong IDF response. They further went on to report that in a Monday interview with the pro-Hezbollah Al Mayadeen outlet, Nasrallah warned that all Israeli land and sea targets are within the range of his group's missiles. He said Hezbollah would act if Israel moved forward with plans to extract gas from the Karish gas field, a natural gas reservoir located in the eastern Mediterranean. Of course, friends, if you remember earlier this month, Hezbollah launched UAVs at the Karish rig, which was shot down by Israel's military. And then Nasrallah, he warned that that was only the beginning and that his group, Hezbollah, would go to war over that field. You know, friends, it's funny how that area wasn't important prior to Israel finding gas in the Mediterranean. Amazing. And friends, I would just remind you that Hezbollah right now has about 150,000 rockets aimed at Israel. And so I think we need to be praying that things don't escalate further, because if Israel finds itself in another war with Hezbollah, experts say that Israel could expect upward of 2,000 rockets launched at her per day. And so let's continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. But friends, you ever wonder just how did Hezbollah get to southern Lebanon in the first place? Well, just a little bit of background here. Back in the early 1970s, when the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization under Yasser Arafat, entered into southern Lebanon, things got so bad for Israel that by 1982, there were more than 270 terrorist attacks against Israel, forcing her to expel the terrorist group. And then Israel created a 12-mile security buffer zone. But friends, that void that was left by the PLO was now filled by guess who? Yeah, you guessed it, Hezbollah, a proxy of Iran, which led, friends, to an 18-year-long war of attrition with Israel in which hundreds of Israelis died. Then in 2006, Hezbollah built up an arsenal of 14,000 Katyusha rockets aimed right at Israel. Then on July 12th of 2006, Hezbollah crossed the Israeli border and killed 8 of her soldiers and captured 2 others. Of course, friends, that led Israel to airstrikes targeting Hezbollah positions, followed by a ground offensive designed to remove Hezbollah from southern Lebanon. Of course, Hezbollah responded by launching 100 rockets per day at Israel. And within a month, the UN brokered a ceasefire. And then on October, the UN approved Resolution 1701, in which Israel then withdrew from the buffer zone, leaving a UN interim forces to ensure that there would be no more hostile activity. Well, how did that work out? Not good. Not good at all. And as I mentioned earlier, Hezbollah now, from 14,000 rockets, has upward of 150,000 rockets, all aimed right at Israel. The UN, the United Nothing, well, they did absolutely nothing. And here we are with things just a-brewing as Iran keeps stirring the pot, this time with their proxy, Hezbollah. Friends, as I said, we need to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem and pray for Israel's leaders to be wise against the schemes of her enemies, friends. But I want to assure you that the God of Israel is still on the throne. And ultimately, it is the God of Israel is the one who is watching over his people, Israel. Just as the psalmist writes in Psalm 125, verse 2, and this is what we read, "As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people from this time forth and forever." And with that, friends, and until next time, thanks for joining us for another episode of In News Surrounding Israel. God bless.